And we thank you all for tuning in these challenging times. It's thrilled to be able to present virtual editions of our programs and use live streaming to create a kind of digital stage that can serve Town Hall's community of curious and engaged Seattleites. Actually, folks from well beyond Seattle, we're finding. Like everyone who's willing to stare or talk into their computers right now, some for the first time, I'd like to thank David, Glenn, and Jody for helping us keep the conversation aloft here at Town Hall. Tonight's broadcast is taking place on Crowdcast, as well as our Facebook and YouTube pages. Anyone who wants to watch this broadcast with closed captioning, we recommend that you view the stream via our YouTube page. To enable real-time closed captioning, click the CC button in the bottom right corner of the video player, and the video will be available for rewatching immediately following tonight's broadcast on that platform as well. Tonight's presentation will last, well, David's already said as long as it takes, but I think all in, we're looking at around an hour. Afterward, I should say towards the end, there will be time for your questions. When you have them, please submit your questions using the Ask a Question button on the bottom of the Crowdcast interface. We'll then be able to select and pose questions. And though we can't guarantee that our speakers will be able to address every question, we will try to get to as many as possible. Upcoming programs include Michael Shermer, Frank Wilderson, Welcome to Nightville. Tomorrow evening, an event with Lulu Miller. It's going to be an extraordinary night, actually. Kirk Bloodsworth, Sister Helen Prejean, the return of our annual Engage UW Science Series, another week of Earshot Jazz live from the Forum, and just announced a night with Samantha Irby and Angela Garbus. We're adding more programs every day, as well as new events released in podcast form. And as you may have discovered, many of our past talks are available in video or podcast form in our digital media library. So in short, poke around the media tab on our homepage, and over the coming weeks, Town Hall will continue to provide not only ways to stay plugged in the present, but plenty more rabbit holes for you to climb down from our past. Town Hall's work is made possible through your support and the support of our sponsors. Arts and culture programs in particular come courtesy For Culture, Arts Fund, Seattle's Office of Arts and Culture, and the Wincote Foundation Northwest. But as most of you know, Town Hall is, above all, a member-supported organization, and I want to thank all of our members watching right now. Just to be very clear, all those rumors you've heard about the vulnerability of nonprofits right now, they're absolutely true. Town Hall and the nonprofit community generally are under significant strain, and we hope you will consider a gift during this difficult time by becoming a member yourself through our website or by making a donation tonight using the URLs in the comment strands, I should say, on your respective feeds tonight. One last economic data point before the program, I promise, is the fact that our beloved independent businesses are feeling the squeeze as well. And if you're interested in deepening your understanding of tonight's subject by, say, buying a book, since that's the very thing that's brought us together, and in supporting entrepreneurs like our wonderful partners at Third Place Books, might I politely suggest that you use the Buy the Book button on our event page or the URL in the comment threads on the other platforms in lieu of, say, a local retail behemoth that used to specialize in books what seems like a century ago. Town Hall Hearts Third Place. All right. David Sax is a journalist and author specializing in business and culture who has written for publications including New York Magazine, Vanity Fair, Bloomberg Business Week, the New York Times, Sever, maybe he knows how to pronounce that, I should, GQ, NPR, and Toronto Life. Not yet, David. Sax is the author of several books, including the James Beard Award-winning Save the Deli from 2009, which examined a decline in Jewish delicatessens, The Tastemakers from 2014, and The Revenge of Analog, which was named one of Michiko Kakutani's best books of 2016 in the New York Times. Those last two books marked his first two appearances at Town Hall Seattle. I should note, in analog form, that is. David is joined tonight by two local authorities on different aspects of entrepreneurship. Glenn Fleischman is an author and technology journalist whose writing can be found in American History, Atlas Obscura, Fast Company, The Economist, as well as Macworld Magazine, where he has written the column, written for the column Mac 911. He is the author of a dozen plus books on all dimensions of technology, old and new, including 2017's Not to Put Too Fine a Point on It, which spanned the history of type and typography. You like how I picked that rather random entry in your catalog, Glenn? It's one of my favorites. Jody Hall has for 15 years been the founder, owner, and CEO of the Seattle-based Cupcake Royale Bakeries. Cupcake Royale has and had locations across the city and has been a launch pad for experimental forays into plenty of other products, including ice cream and cannabis edibles. Hall is active in local political and business circles and has advocated for employee healthcare reform as a member of the Washington CAN Small Business for Secure Healthcare Coalition. David's latest book, The Soul of an Entrepreneur, Work and Life Beyond the Startup Myth, is the subject of tonight's talk. We'll begin with a conversation between David and Glenn, and then they'll welcome Jody into the room. But for the meantime, please welcome Glenn Fleischman and David Sax.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Hello, David. Thank you for being here.
Heads pop out. Thanks, Ware.
That's right. I mean, I'm actually in Seattle. David, thank you for virtually coming to Seattle for this event. And I'm sorry we're not in the beautiful town hall, but town hall will rise again like so many things. David, you've traveled the world. You've lived in different places. You live in Toronto now. You talk to people all the time about how they run their businesses. And I think we should start with the past. This book is a bit about the past, and it's a lot about the future. Since the present is so uncertain, let's start with the past, and we'll work our way gingerly forward. I feel like one of your big theses with this book that hits home in Seattle, which is the land of the entrepreneur, we've got Jeff Bezos, we have Bill Gates, but we also have people, thousands and thousands of people who have one-person businesses, five-person businesses, 100-person businesses. You have this thesis that we've been obsessed too much with this holy trinity of Zuckerberg, Jobs, and Musk are usually how it's formulated. What should we be looking at if we're not looking at these titans of the .com world or even the car world? What should we be looking at instead?
Well, I think we have to look at the reality of what the ecosystem is, to borrow a term that's horrendously overused and beaten to death in the technology startup center. And that is, an ecosystem is an environment of various organisms that work together, and only by working together and each doing their part does the entire environment flourish. In the ecosystem of entrepreneurship, you have every type of entrepreneur from every single background doing every kind of business in every kind of way. You have the alpha predators, your Amazons, your Boeings, your Costco's, your Nordstroms, and of course your Microsofts to round out all my Seattle references. Go Sonics. And yes, and you have the thousands, if not millions, of other businesses that support all those things and compete with them and make up the neighborhoods. Last time I was in Seattle, which I guess was almost about a year ago, and I remember walking around, Capitol Hill, kind of near where I was staying downtown. It's just like there's bars and record shops and tattoo parlors and little stores that make signs and dry cleaners and this type of restaurant, that type of restaurant, expensive restaurants, takeout restaurants, this type of coffee shop, that type of coffee shop. I know a puzzle company and a game company called Wonder Forge, which is right upstairs from Elliott Bay Books, and they are kind of the leading maker of board games for preschoolers and toddlers, of which I have played the Busy Airport game many, many times. I actually played it today with my kids. So this is what entrepreneurship is. But we've only focused on the alpha predators. And there's a great paper I cite in the book, which I spoke to the guy who wrote it, Howard Aldrich, was one of the two authors out of University of North Carolina. And they looked at the entrepreneurship journals, the sort of popular entrepreneurship business journals and entrepreneurship studies, which is one of the fastest growing fields in academia the past 2 decades. And they looked at, thousands of papers published over a decade. And they said that, even though IPOs and venture capital investments represent like 0.5% of the entrepreneurial activity in America in a given year, these two events made up 50% of the papers in these journals. And this is what we've done in academia. We've done in popular culture, who makes the cover of Business Week and Forbes and Fast Company and all these publications that you and I write for, who gets, their faces in the press. It's, oh, this person just closed a $50, $100, $200 million round. They're the next big thing. They're the hotshot. These kids dropped out of Stanford, or so on and so forth. But never someone who has a medium-sized manufacturing company in Richmond or Tacoma that makes some essential part. They were making ventilators, but nobody cared about them, right? Or a small family business. It doesn't. We so lionized and romanticized one flavor of entrepreneurship and one type of entrepreneur at the expense of the rest. And so this book is really a way of reclaiming that, finding out how that happened, and then shifting the focus on, okay, well, what does entrepreneurship mean beyond these rare, super successful geniuses like, Jeff and Bill.
I think there's a really key point you mentioned relatively early in the book, which is that there is kind of a contempt in larger culture for doing something sustainable. And I remember this, I think it used to be called a boutique business with the same kind of contempt. Then it became a lifestyle business with the notion that having a lifestyle is a bad thing, that you always want the hockey stick. But it seems, I think you argue in this book, and I think reality shows us that most businesses are lifestyle businesses. Can you explain what that means, why people use that term when they talk about entrepreneurship, why they use it with that disdain, if that is what most of us are living in?
Yeah. A lifestyle business is a term that really came around in the middle of the 1980s. A professor in New Hampshire, of all places, at a University of New Hampshire business school, kind of wrote an article about it. And it essentially connoted a business owned by someone whose goal is not to grow that business to the point where they can sell it in a exit event to other investors or a competitor or so on, or make it public on the stock market. The goal of the business is to fund and sustain the lifestyle of the entrepreneur. But the reality is this type of business encompasses 99.9% of businesses out there, from the little boutique of someone hand sewing masks, I guess, to use a current example, to a mid-sized chain of, restaurants or oil change places that might have 2 or 3 locations, and one family owns it, or one individual owns it, or a couple of partners own it, up to fairly large companies, right? There are some significantly sized manufacturing firms, consulting firms, advertising agencies, who have dozens, if not hundreds of people working for them, millions and millions, if not tens or hundreds of millions of dollars in revenues and sales every year, global operations. But it might just be several people who say, well, this is great. Why would I ever want to sell this? This is my business, and I want to enjoy it. The way that it became this derogatory term is very much in the world of venture capital, because venture capital investing, in order to make its money and make its return on its investment, requires an exit event. Either your company has to be bought by Microsoft or Amazon, pretty much, or Google, or you have to eventually get to the stock market, have an IPO, and then you can sell your shares in the investment and return it back to your investors. So often when individual entrepreneurs are pitching venture capitalists or angel investors, who are sort of a smaller tier of individual venture capitalists, people who are investing in these high growth businesses, and they'll say, oh, well, I have this idea for, XYZ or whatever. Oh, well, that sounds like a lifestyle business. As in, I can't invest in that knowing, because I will never get the 10x return, and you will never sort of sell this thing. But you can make a lot of money investing in lifestyle businesses. Private equity invests in lifestyle businesses. There are many firms, and I know people who are like, yeah, we buy well-performing veterinary offices in middle-sized markets that are highly profitable, and we give them money to grow and do technology, and they get to keep their ownership, and we take a stake in it, and here's how we do it. But that's not sexy. That doesn't get you on the stage of the Fast Company top 500, or the 40 under 40, or the 30 under 30, or the 50 over 50, whatever the hell list of the week of hot entrepreneurs there are. But for most of us who go into business for ourselves, we're not doing it to sell it. It's not some commodity. We're not flipping it, right? Like it's not a real estate play that we're buying something, fixing it up, and flipping it. We're buying it to live in. We're buying that business to be and fund our lifestyle. Right. And not just from a financial perspective, but from an emotional perspective, right? This is my baby. Why would I give it up?
Right, and that's, I mean, some people view their house as their biggest investment in their life. If they're lucky enough to be able to buy one at the right time, pay the mortgage, keep it up, right? That's the thing that they're going to retire on. And especially in the United States and some other countries that may not offer assurances through life, the house is the foundation of a lot of American families' wealth, and the lack of access to a house. Small businesses have had the same, I want to say, feeling is that often you can sell a small business, and if it's under, forget, there's different tax liabilities for inheritance and sales, whatever. But if it's not a, it doesn't have to be a terribly successful business, but it could be a multi-$100,000 sale. The owners are in their 70s. There have been a number of bookstores in Seattle in recent years where older owners, they owned the bookstore building, or they wanted to sell out, and they wanted to get some money out of it, and they were able to do it. And that bookstore lives on in a slightly different form, or it may be an entirely new kind of store. So, you know, there is wealth being built, but I hear what you say is that David Swenson, who was the lead institutional investor at Yale for many years, he wrote this book in which he was trying to advise individual investors. And he said, meet the market, don't beat the market, because you can't beat the market. You have to be working like him to beat the market. And I thought in reading about, when you talk about lifestyle businesses versus these venture capital backed ones, that's the thing, is that maybe our goal should just be to live with and exceed inflation just a little, you know, to have something that grows and that maybe we can sell one day, but we're not looking to cash out. We're looking to move on. Is that a strategy that businesses you've met with so many, you've talked to so many, is that something they think about? This is like a life, maybe not a lifetime investment, but it's something at some point that might give them the ability to then retire or change their lifestyle as well.
I think it depends on who's behind the business, because the reality is, you know, this is the book I wrote is really, it's not about how to be an entrepreneur, how to succeed, how to start a business, how to grow a business, when to sell it. It's about why. Why do entrepreneurs do what they do? What gets them into it? And then what keeps them going? And I think what I found is, first of all, a lot of it's dependent on personality. We're always going to have these super aggressive alpha individuals, largely male, for whom entrepreneurship is a game of winning and losing, and they have to win. And sometimes they do, and a lot of the time they don't. That's just reality, and that's the odds. The odds are that not every business is going to be successful, regardless of who's behind it. But I think it does come down to sort of a temperament and a stage of life. I think, you know, after that initial excitement of starting something, you settle, you know, the honeymoon phase ends and you settle into the marriage and the long, hard work of life with that business. And you struggle with that business and you work with it, and it becomes something that, in many ways, you know, the growth will sort of plateau for most of those businesses, or it'll remain in this steady way. And I've talked to these people, and a lot of them are content. I mean, there's that famous Nobel Prize winning study from about a decade ago, which says, you know, after, I don't know, I guess on average, $90,000 a household, right? Happiness shows no increase the more money you make. And I think most people I know who are entrepreneurs, that holds true for them as well. Like they want to be able to do the thing they do. They want to be able to pursue their ideas, to build the business they want, to work on their own terms, to live by their values, to do stuff with their community, to have a lifestyle that you know, gives them the things they want. But they realize there's a limit to that. And there was this one individual that I interviewed for the book, Kevin Mauger, who has a company outside Philadelphia, which makes conveyor systems. So conveyor belts and all the Goldberg machines, like any, you know, if something's coming off a conveyor system, they're one of the people making it.
That's great.
And he decided to sell his company to his employees in an employee ownership plan, ESOP, rather than sell to an investor, a private equity investor. And he could have sold the company for $10 million, or $20 million, but he sold it for 10, because you have to sell it at a fair market value to your employees. That's part of the deal. And I said, well, why did he do that? He's like, you know, I have enough. I have a house. You know, I don't like clothes. We have a place in Florida. I have enough money for my kids to be fine and taken care of, and my wife and I to retire when we want to. But like, what else do I need? There's a greater value than money.
I think another aspect you get into too is this issue of being your own boss. And your family comes from what my family also calls the schmata business. It's the rag and clothing, the blouse man in upstate New York in that famous movie. My family was in cabinetry making in the old country. They were joiners, and then came here and we set up furniture shops. And I don't know that anybody in my family, almost nobody, after we talked last, I thought back, almost nobody in my family has ever really worked for anybody for very long. And you've worked for yourself. You're a freelancer. You have a history throughout your family of people who just said, I'd rather sell schmatas than go into an office, put on a tie. How much does that play into this entrepreneurial dream that where people just, they don't want a boss. They don't want someone to settle what they do every day.
I mean, I think that is the fundamental thing, right? That separates entrepreneurs from everyone else. And there's been a lot of talk over the past couple of decades of, well, the corporate entrepreneur, the intrapreneur, the entrepreneur in residence. And I always call bullshit on that. Like, if you have to go to Deloitte or Ernst & Young or whatever corporation, and you have entrepreneur on your business card and an entrepreneur on your office, but you still report to the CFO or the CTO or your manager named Jeff. And Jeff really bugs you on Tuesdays, and there's a dress code, and you got to go to an office like a schmuck. Nothing wrong with that, but that is so antithetical to the idea of entrepreneurship, because the one thing that links every entrepreneur, whether you are someone like me who works for myself and doesn't employ anyone, or whether you're Jeff freaking Bezos, is freedom and independence. If Jeff Bezos is like, I want to start a rocket company, no one's going to be like, well, I don't know, we better check their quarterly results. He's like, screw you, I'm going to start a rocket company. If like everybody in Amazon has to wear clown hats today, they have to do it because Jeff determines that that's the thing to do. Right. If I want to wear a clown hat, I can do it. I have that freedom. If I want to pursue a book about entrepreneurs, even though I wasn't quite sure where it was going, I have the freedom to do that too, as long as I could sell it to a publisher. It's interesting. I read a book as part of the research of this. It was called The Enterprising Man. And it was one of the first books in America written about entrepreneurs. It's from the 1950s. It was done out of Michigan State. And they interview a bunch of entrepreneurs around the Detroit area. And they're all kind of in car parts businesses or stuff related to car businesses, garages, brake pad manufacturers, distributors, whatever. And they have this thing about becoming an entrepreneur. I remember this one guy's quote, and he's like, these bums I worked for, I didn't like these bums. And these bums were always telling me this, but I'm not going to work for these bums again. And I think every entrepreneur at the heart of hearts reaches this point where they're like, I am done working for these bums. I am done. Like I'm going to go start the thing that I want to start, because I can't take someone else telling me what to do. And that's the thing with my family. I mean, that's where it comes from. My dad went to law school, articled, which is like associate or whatever in the United States at one of the big firms, because that's what they tell you to do. And it's like they're like, oh, Sax, you're too entrepreneurial. He's like, oh, these bums. I'm going to start my own firm. And it wasn't like he started a big firm. It was just him. He had a partner for a couple of years. The partner moved to Florida. It's always been just him and an assistant, and that's it. But like, he did well, and he still has that, like those big firms. Like, he still had that. Oh, those that think they're so good with their hours, but I hustled and did better work than they did, and I was in Hong Kong throwing telephone books against the wall and betting against it while these guys were sitting in their offices. Like that sense of proving yourself, I think, links all those entrepreneurs together, and that's that freedom, that's that independence, that's that intoxicating thing. That eventually, even though most entrepreneurs know you're better off taking the job at the law firm financially and benefits, and over the long run, you're better off staying at the big company and getting that gold watch from Boeing, at a certain point, you can't let the bums win.
I think there's another key aspect you get into too, which is the immigrant experience in entrepreneurialism, which is, it often comes the 0th generation or first generation is people arrive. You write very movingly of Sufis, of a bakery restaurant in cafe in Toronto started by Syrian immigrants, and the huge onrush of Syrian immigrants into Canada in the face of war there, and the folks who came. Their skills weren't valued. I mean, this is true of every wave of immigrant, right? No matter how many centuries you go, it's not many centuries, but since the rise of professionalism as a necessary thing, their skills aren't valued despite how many skills they have. They can be a doctor in some old country in Africa, South America, and Eastern Europe, and they don't have the credentials. So for the immigrant community, I think you made that great distinction between kind of there's the minimum wage if you can get it, doing cleaning or something like that, which is not enough in most countries to build a life, especially without socialized medicine and other support systems like in America. I'll say in passing. So I think you talk a lot about this pull they have. It's both to work for oneself, but it's a way to pull themselves up. I know that's how, 3 generations ago, that's how my father's father's father brought our family up into a middle class is that way. What what drives immigrants? What gives them the impulse, I guess, to fight this battle, often language and taxation and regulation, and often doing something they didn't even do where they came from. They are changing their lives. How did they make that happen for themselves?
I mean, this is, reflects a lot of the moment that we're in, right? Because 30 million Americans or so unemployed in the past couple of weeks. A lot of them, even if the economy reopens and they find a cure and so on, not all of them are going to go back to work.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is this tremendous necessity that's going to happen where people who want to work are not going to be able to find a job, and entrepreneurship will be the best option to them. For a lot of immigrants who end up as entrepreneurs, this is what happens. And sometimes it's purely out of financial necessity. You cannot find any job, or the jobs that are available are, again, chambermaid in hotel, janitor, fast food, whatever, menial minimum wage jobs, which are open to people who don't have local qualifications, whose university degrees are not recognized, who don't have the language barrier, who face systemic racism and cultural discrimination just by the virtue of who they are, regardless of their level of what they were doing back home. And entrepreneurship becomes this necessity. How can I make money? Okay, let's start something. But beyond that financial necessity, I think what I found was there is a much deeper one. And that is, entrepreneurship becomes the vehicle to reclaim control over a seemingly uncontrollable situation. It becomes something that they have the ability to control. They have the ability to dictate the terms of. I remember Hussam al-Sufi, the father of this family, who were not, poor people fleeing the front lines in Syria. They were actually living in Saudi Arabia. They were very wealthy. He was a manager at a 5-star hotel resort on the Dead Sea. The daughter was already studying in Toronto at university. That's why they came. They had a yacht and private clubs and drivers and all that sort of stuff. But because of the war, Saudi Arabia could revoke their visa at any moment, and they'd be sent back to Syria, and they didn't want that. So they moved to Toronto. And of course, his engineering degree didn't count in Canada. Previous experience in hotels, like, yeah, sure, you're welcome to clean the floor at this hotel, but we're not going to make you a manager. And anyway, they opened up this restaurant. They opened up this small little restaurant. They make flatbread kind of Syrian pizzas and other stuff. And it's a struggle. The restaurant's not, it enjoys some success, but it's not yet profitable. When I'm talking to him, I guess 2 summers ago, and he's making the sort of darkly gallows humor jokes about if this doesn't work out, we'll get a camper van and we'll drive around Canada and we'll cook out of the back of it. And I was like, well, look, I'm sure you could always get a job. And I just remember him sitting there in the back patio of the restaurant smoking the endless cigarettes. And he goes, "A job? Are you kidding me? A job? We didn't come here to get a job." And he said,
Oh my
we are
God, that's
done working for anyone else.
yeah.
Because what we have gained here is that complete freedom that entrepreneurship allows you. We put our name on the front of this business. We dictate the music that's in it. We dictate the way it is. We decide who we hire, how we train them, the image they have, everything that we put out into the world. Or I could work at a donut shop or a McDonald's or some restaurant or some place and just be the immigrant and the guy. You know, he said, we made friends here. We built a community. People know us, and we've established our identity in Canada as Canadians through this business. So he's like, even if this business fails, I will start another one. Because I need to always have that control. And this was the same thing that I heard from not just the Syrian immigrants that I talked about and interviewed in this part of the book, but you know, the many immigrants that entrepreneurs that I've talked to over the years in Canada and the United States. And I think it's something that you see, you know, in Seattle for many generations. Once people have that sense of freedom and independence, like the freedom that comes with living in a democracy, or as you call it in America now, a democracy.
Thank you.
Sorry.
No, it's necessary.
You're loath to give that up. You're loath to give that freedom up. And I think that's doubly true for those who come to it from those reasons.
It's a rough time for everybody now. I mean, we are all going to feel, I think, a little bit like the upset that immigrants, refugees particularly have, as we're going to feel like refugees in our own countries, perhaps with the tumult, because as you say, a huge number of people displaced from work. It's unclear what the future is going to be, but I found myself while reading your book kind of uplifted too, because it reminds me that we don't have to rely on big companies. Big companies need to do big logistics things. We need, you know, fleets of trucks to move potatoes around so they don't rot in the fields. And that's not a one-person operation. Not in this country. In some countries, it is thousands of people with their trucks moving potatoes around. But I wonder, the hope I got from the book is that this base entrepreneurialism, it's present in many countries. I think it's maybe most intense in the United States, maybe because we were closest in this tension between sudden poverty and success, that we sort of hover in the middle in that lifestyle position as best we can. But can entrepreneur, we're going to bring Jody in a second to talk from her personal experience here, but can entrepreneurialism at this level that we're going to need it now, can it help us get ourselves reoriented as we understand, as we get through the, you know, into a new stage of what living with coronavirus is like?
Absolutely. And you're seeing that already. I mean, from week one of this, back 10 years ago, also known as March, you saw people who had businesses rapidly adapting far faster than, you know, big companies. Okay, the small grocery store, the small fruit market, boom, we're going to do home delivery. We're going to do this. Here's our protocol. Here's how we're doing it. Here's how we're servicing. People are seeing opportunities. People are figuring out what ideas they have, and because they're entrepreneurs, they're acting on them. They don't need permission to do it. They
don't need permission. That's such a great.
They don't need permission from a corporation, but they also don't need permission from a venture capital investor. They're not putting together a pitch deck and standing in front of a bunch of people. It's like, hey, here's the way we're going to do retail new in the post-COVID environment. We just need to raise $1 million. It's like they're starting something today. And you're seeing that in cities like Seattle and Toronto and every community. I mean, I'm up in a small town about 2 hours north of Toronto where my mother-in-law and parents have a house. And, you know, someone opened up a homemade pasta shop last week.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, we were thinking about it for a couple of years, and there was this empty thing, so we did it. And he's like, we got to hire more people. We're going like crazy because people are just buying lasagnas. That simple sort of stuff. You know, entrepreneurship is that you know, driven by necessity, right? A lot of the time. And if there is a problem, if people have a need to make a living, or if there is something that people need that they can serve, you're going to see it. Nothing is going to stop it. You can't tamp it down. And unfortunately, as the worse things get for the economy, the more you'll see it. but it's not going to be the entrepreneurship that we've been salivating over and venerating and romanticizing and throwing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions and billions of dollars with. The WeWork and the giant rounds. It's going to be the mom and pop businesses, the individuals, the things in your community that you actually realize you really need and have tremendous value. And it's not one company inventing something that's going to completely change and get us out of all of this. It's Jody.
It's a perfect transition.
To just take you out.
I want to lead into and welcome Jody. I want to bring up one and I want to bring up one anecdote, which is it's exactly what you say. Is most of the companies that we feel have driven the economy, these big companies invent a need and then fill it. And a very fine company, I have no criticism at all, just said they're shutting down after some trouble. It's an electronics company, and they make a thing that helps you track your car performance and GPS. And my friend John Gruber wrote in his blog, the company that made a diagnostic automobile dingus has shut down. And I thought, oh my God, I feel bad for the company. They're already kind of on the way out, but I was like, they're making dinguses. We don't need dinguses right now. No company founded on a dingus is gonna, what's Apple and Google working on right now? They're working on privacy and enhancing COVID tracking. What are some of the biggest restaurant in Seattle, or I should say the most famous, well-reviewed restaurant in Seattle opened a burger shack and is trying to help people with, CSAs, help farms and so forth. So that's the kind of innovation, no more dinguses. We want, other things. So Jody, thank you so much for joining us and being part of this, because, you're an inspiration in the local community because you have never asked permission. And you have created a number of trends here too. This is for folks not in the Seattle area. It's like Cupcake Royale opened, and then we had the wave of cupcake shops. You were still here. Then we had pie shops. There were pie shops everywhere. Ice cream. I was waiting for, I don't know what the next thing was going to be, but it was exciting because people leapt into it. I don't know if you want to start with the past or today. You can tell me, maybe a little happier to talk about what drove you to jump into this space 15 years ago, when there was an absence of people fulfilling these needs.
It's interesting listening to you talk about kind of what drives entrepreneurs. And by the way, I'm in my son's room, and this is where he does his Zoom lessons. He's in fifth grade. I didn't really do much anyway, didn't prep for this, meaning the background. But, I think for me, I think I was really fortunate to work for one of the great visionary entrepreneurs of our time, in my opinion, who really understood. And that's, I grew up when there were 30 stores at Starbucks right after Seattle U. I got a job moonlighting there as a barista. I fueled my college career with Starbucks. And, it was at the time, it was fresh roasted coffee. Howard kind of started 2 years before I was hired on there to create this whole espresso idea. And I got a job moonlighting there as a barista because I bought my first house out of college. I don't know how I afforded to do this, but my parents didn't, pay for these kinds of things. And anyway, the point is they asked me to come on board full time and leave my job in finance in downtown Seattle and be a store manager. And I was so enthralled with the vision and the culture and feeling a part of something. And I think Howard was incredibly genius at that vision. And so for me, growing up there from, I think, 30 stores to 3,000 stores, opened 25 markets, went public, managed kind of how we created the Starbucks experience around how we connected with community, how we kind of created this new language around coffee, et cetera, what we did with music, what we did with film, et cetera. Just an amazing ride there. And then when I left, I kind of felt like I learned a lot. I really want to test my wings. So for me, it was more around so inspired by a vision, a very clear North Star, and wanting to create something. And, at the time, Starbucks was moving from their short, tall grande into, grande, venti, bagente, whatever. And I was like, wow, you're just feeding people a lot of milk and a lot of sugar, and that's not really good. And yes, it's great for profit, but I just was like, you're walking away from your core, man. Like, it's coffee and it's community and it's gathering, and this speaks to us, and it's not about drive through, and you know what I mean, and just filling landfills and all these things. So I felt like I had to do something. I knew I wanted to do coffee, and I was, learned at Starbucks. Of course, you can't. You have to open across the street from yourself or somebody else will. But if you have something compelling, people will drive out of the way. And so we were the first cupcake bakery outside of Magnolia Bakery in New York to open in the United States. And it blew up. Who would have thought? And my friends thought I was crazy. And I look back and say, why did I do that? But it was all about community. It was about baking from scratch. It was about connecting, having neighbors run into each other and actually introduce themselves in our cafe. To me, it was a bigger story around joy and connection. And so I'm a weirdo entrepreneur that just saw this vision and was like, hey, cake is part of our daily life. It's birthdays, it's weddings, it's babies, it's celebration. And this makes so much sense. And I have a background from Starbucks. I love baking, hired people to figure this out. And it grew really well. And it was very much a lifestyle business. There probably was an opportunity to sell that for a whole lot of money at a certain time. That time is not now. So it is an entrepreneurial game on right now. It's innovate or die for a lot of us in the food area, in the restaurant food, bars. I mean, it is painful and tricky right now.
It seems like it's evolving like every day.
Yeah.
I was blown away by, Canlis has always been it's a community-centered business in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
For charging hundreds of dollars for the most incredible meal you can get, they also have always been supportive of farmers, supportive of it's run by a family, and they turned around
I love Brian. He's a dear friend. Love him. When he did the drive-thru, I'm like, let's do cupcakes with your drive-thru. He's like, you should do a drive-thru. I'm like,
exactly
maybe we will.
But they turned on a dime and tried to turn this into a whole new kind of thing they'd never done before. And I feel like everybody, so it's not obviously just Seattle, but it wasn't like if you're doing drive-through, you can do more drive-through. It was innovation, and every day I read something new. I know it sounds like a horrible struggle. I should have started this by saying, "How are you doing?" is the other question. How are you? Instead of leading into this, but
no, I mean, and you're right. Every day is 28 days. Like it's just going incredibly slow, yet incredibly fast, and minutes and hours. And 2 weeks ago it was getting your application in for the PPP and the catastrophe that was. Now it's like, you got your funds. Can I spend it? I don't know. We still don't know. The New York Times did a great piece yesterday on that. Thank you. And it's like, as a restaurant, you're supposed to hire all these people back, yet the state's not open. This doesn't make sense. And then do you lay them off and you lose your people? They go back to that line that people can't get in anymore. It just is kind of a mess. And so there's all that stuff. And then it's like, when does this come back? And what does it look like? And I think for all of us, it's been intense. But I will tell you one thing that I think is really interesting coming out of this is, for sure, in my little circle of restaurant, cafe, food type places, there's a lot of conversation between us to join forces. How are you talking to your landlords? How can we figure out a win-win? So, these landlords have bills to pay too, for the most part. And most of them are not, mega REITs or whatever. They're 2, 3, 4 buildings, their livelihoods here too. And, figuring out what is that strategy. Obviously, when this market comes back and we're doing 50, 70% of sales, does your rent go down? What are all these city costs, these taxes that it really is creating a laser focus. It's creating collaboration. For example, I was chatting with friends at, Brian, of course, and friends at Terra Plata, friends at Altana. A friend of mine, a neighbor across the street here, is doing tulips with the Hmong family in Pike Place Market that lost that entire business. All those tulips.
We're about to get some for Mother's Day. There's an undisclosed pickup location to get flowers from the Hmong folks.
Right. And we're partnering with them to do pickups.
Wonderful.
So pre-order at Cupcake as well. I'm talking to Altana Bagel. He's figured out this kind of neighborhood angels that want to do drops. So we're kind of just to build an order for them. One, like maybe we'll do the drop in Issaquah and Altana will do the drop in Bellevue. Tara will do the drop in, it's kind of like this amazing opportunity of entrepreneurship. Matt Galvin, who owns Pagliacci, who's a well-known pizza he owns Macrina Bakery, a dear friend, and I
right.
love him. And, you know, we've had a relationship for a long time. He's been a great mentor and all that. And I called him up. I was like, hey, could we have your Pagliacci locations be pickup points because our stores aren't open? Could we drop them there? You already have people you're delivering out. Could we work together? And he's like, hey, Jody, why don't I just order a whole bunch of cupcakes? And on, you know, Saturday, the 18th of April, everybody got a 2-pack of cupcakes. And that was a huge order. It allows us to kind of get a big check in the door, hire some people back, know that we had some business. And he just called to sign up for his he's like, let's do it again. And I love it. And, you know, we're all just innovating and trying to figure out how technology works, how delivery works, how we are really efficient and what the world looks like after, because it is not going to be the same.
I think one of the things that this crisis has demonstrated, especially is, and diffused a bit of the myth around entrepreneurship is, you know, part of that myth is it's a zero-sum game. You're out to kill the coffee shop across the corner. You know, if there's a coffee shop that opens up near you, you got to put them out of business. And actually, what we're seeing, especially amongst the independent businesses and the community-based entrepreneurs, is that willingness to help each other out, to realize that you all exist together. It's, as I said at the beginning, an ecosystem, and an ecosystem doesn't work if all creatures in it can't survive. And that entrepreneurial spirit isn't just for people lining their own pockets. It's helping. I've seen it in so many examples of people helping each other.
There's a strong spirit of that. I will completely agree. Yeah, it's true. And you know, I think I'm kind of a weirdo that started a business because I wanted to create the most joyful part of a person's day, and this nostalgia and thinking back to those moments. Like, it's all about emotional connection. I definitely learned about that at Starbucks, and how you create this ritual around coffee, and how you create this meaning, and you get to meet with people, you get to learn, you get to hang out, talk about the movie, the book, whatever. And it's always been about building a culture of trust and collaboration. It's like, I'm not here to take over the world. In fact, let's be nice. When my first competitor opened up in Seattle 4 or 5 years after we finally had a cupcake competitor, we just chatted and we're like, let's not play cupcake wars with the media. Let's be kind to each other. You do your thing, we'll do our thing. Let's never disparage. Like, I feel like I'm a collaborator, and that spirit is alive and well. Standing up for causes like $15 wage or marriage equality, all these things that people said, don't ever mix business. Like, you have to, actually. We're the new kind of moral compass of community. I mean, we're the ones that are donating to your kids' auction. And, you know, as a percent of sales, we probably donate 500 times what Jeff Bezos donates, who makes $25 billion in 1 month. I mean, we're the ones that you can see our face, and we respond because we care. We're like, absolutely, we want to support
The week before all this happened, we're going to go to, there's actual people watching this besides the three of us, 48 of them apparently. We're going to be able to answer questions. So if you go ask a question down there, I assume there's a way that Glenn can pull it up.
That's right. If you click on ask a question, you can type it in, and then I will see the top questions as people ask them.
But, you know, exactly what you're saying, like the week before, you know, that first week of March, I was pounding the pavement in Toronto for my kids' fun fair auction.
Totally.
Happened. And any business that I went into that was a chain or a franchise, like, oh, here's an email that you have to send to someone. It was like, he's at corporation that's never going to answer. And anyone that I went into that was a business that was owned by an entrepreneur, yes, what can we do? Oh, my kids go to that school. I went to that school. Oh, I walk to school every morning. Yeah. Regardless of what type of business it was, whether it was the new kind of hipster coffee shop or the high-end restaurant or the small immigrant business, like, they just immediately offer, because this is our value in the community. This is these people are our people. This is the business that they keep alive. You know, entrepreneurship doesn't exist in this vacuum.
Right. And I'm not really,
sure.
right now, I'm not worried about, say, General Mills. I'm not sending off a donation to General Mills or pre-purchasing their products, but I'm, am going to go to Cupcake Royale. And in contrast, I want Cupcake Royale. I need you to survive, or I need you to transmute into the next thing or be part of the next transformation, because you're going to be the part that helps save the city. General Mills and Amazon, other companies need to persist in a certain way as well. I think, David, you do a great job in the book in kind of painting that employment shift. Like we can't be a nation of 300 million individual businesses. That some things can't get done, but neither do we need like 5 employers that employ us all either. And
Right, yeah.
I think this is teaching us, this horrible time is teaching that this in a much more intensive way. Although I will say I have been moved and surprised by the actions that are obviously selfless of some larger companies, because there's nothing they're getting out of it. No one's changing their mind. It's not more sales they're doing. So there are, in some cases, I'll see some very large company that I would think is as heartless as any corporation, and it does something I'm like, I'm actually moved by that because there is no benefit. But I don't have to question the motives of someone like you, Jody, because you are part of the community. This is part of it. So what you do is to help your employees, to help the local economy, to help the community.
Can we see questions here?
Have people asked questions? I'm looking at the thing. I think that I'm supposed to be looking at 4 questions.
Hi, y'all. This is Josh, just chiming in from Town Hall. Unfortunately, it looks like there aren't any questions, so I guess if y'all want to just keep talking, and hopefully, hopefully some of our viewers will chime in. But yeah, if you're not seeing anything in the ask.
Oh wait, I got a question. Let's start. Actually, this is a good one. This will be my next question too. It's fantastic. As Barbara asks, do you think COVID will create new barriers to entry for entrepreneurs? Will only rich people get to start new businesses? And I think that is probably a question on everybody's mind.
So this is the interesting thing about what kind of got me to write the book, Barbara. And this is a great question. In that the model of entrepreneurship that was really being promoted over the past decade or so, the sort of Silicon Valley style startup model, is something that's largely only accessible to those who are extremely privileged. If the majority of venture capital funding goes to people who go to Harvard or Stanford, I think it's like 45% of that it just goes to people from those 2 universities.
Oh my gosh.
The majority of people who go to those universities and are getting that funding are fairly well off, right? Jeff left Goldman Sachs and Mark grew up in a very wealthy family, and there's nothing wrong with that. But when you look at the other statistics, like the fact that only 2.8% of venture capital investments went to companies led by women in 2018, and a similar percentage of companies led by minorities. And God help you if you're a minority woman. Those barriers were already there in that world. But out in the rest of the world, anyone can start a business. And people start businesses all the time, regardless of their background. The fastest growing group of entrepreneurs in America are minority women, Latino women, African American women, Asian American women, Native American women. But of course, even though they're doing it in greater numbers and higher proportion than their white counterparts, they receive a fraction of the funding. And I'm not talking venture capital funding. I'm talking bank loans, community loans. Those things have been contracting for really decades, accelerating since the Great Recession. And so people are able to start a business and become entrepreneurs. The challenge is them growing as entrepreneurs and the capital to do that. And I don't mean, $100 million check to get from SoftBank and go IPO. I mean like $100,000 to build your second location of your cupcake shop or of your coffee shop, or expand your hair salon so you can actually have more chairs there for people. That is something that coming out of this crisis, I hope we'll see an increase of community lending organizations and smaller lending organizations that can provide capital to the entrepreneurs who are going to need it. Because if they don't have that capital, then they're going to be destined to stay small and struggling. And there's a difference between having a lifestyle business and a business that never manages to get above water. And it's cast often as the fault of those entrepreneurs for not being smart enough or being successful enough. But if you are an African American woman, yeah.
Yeah. No, I was going to say, I think that it's going to create a whole wave of really interesting entrepreneurialism. And I think that necessity is the mother of invention. And this is going to get ugly. I mean, you talked about the unemployment numbers. I felt like I saw that on March 17th when we closed. We decided to close early. We could stay open, we do food, but I just saw the mad rush to the unemployment line and was like, I got to get you guys taken care of, at least for the short term, until we figure this out, because this is going to get ugly. We all know that. And we're still kind of ahaing through, oh my God, I haven't thought about that and that impact. And I think that we need to, I think that you'll see really interesting innovation. And I hope that we do better at taking care of people, and we innovate around how we govern, how we fund, how we tax, how we treat the planet, all these things that I hope good innovation comes out of that. But you're right, where did the funds go? And you're seeing the big unicorn IPOs just completely fall apart. I just read something the other day about women-led, I don't know, was it public companies are doing significantly better on the stock market right now? I'm like, yeah. And as a person who sold a good ship in terms of raising money, 2 rounds, feeling that 2% of who gets funded, and then we were acquired by a big VC and went through all that fun stuff. And yeah, what to do, what not to do. Call me.
Yeah, I want to say, I think this is the, like, I don't want to sound, I say this sometimes and I'm trying to not sound callous, because it's very easy for me. I work at home. I do a lot of remote work. I'm an entrepreneur myself, but I sell weird stuff. Like, I have a lifestyle one person business, and it's gone very well. So I speak from a position of privilege. And so I have to avoid saying something that sounds like, oh, it's going to be great. But I think we have the opportunity, as you say, nothing is going to work the same as it used to. So this is the opportunity to make everything work better. We don't have to fall back and say everything is going to be just as bad as it was and worse because we don't have jobs. We can say, well, we do need that social safety net that you have in Canada. We don't have here. They have in Europe, but we don't have here. The medicine, or the new political structures, what causes changes, not to get into specific individuals, but even to say, like, who is serving the needs. And we can even look, like, in Seattle city government, this is a microcosm of the whole. We're considered a very progressive city in a lot of ways. We often don't pursue progressive policies, say, regarding people who are unhoused, and right now their need is among the most keen, and we're seeing restaurateurs go out and feed the homeless in the streets and try to, this is a whole social upheaval we haven't even barely begun to feel the full first impacts of, but what comes out of it could be a better society. It's just, how do we bring everyone along as that happens? How do we be part of that? And it's going to be an ocean of small businesses, an ocean of people like you, Jody, willing to work with everyone else. I think that helps that come along.
Just the democratization of what this has done for filmmaking, for creativity, music, whatever. I mean, so many people are figuring Etsy, etc. Like, there's Airbnb, there's all these kinds of ways to innovate through and utilize some of these channels to create wealth, to think about things differently, I guess. And we need to. This country needs. This is showing our weaknesses, and it seems really clear that there's some things that need to be addressed and fixed and taken care of. And you read the New York Times this weekend, and they talk about that visionary person. I don't know if you read this in the business or the Sunday Review, and they talked about how this person saw COVID in 1994 and wrote a book about it, and then was just like, and the thing that we never predicted, we knew it would cause mayhem, we knew it would just ripple the economy and gut it and take out the entire world in terms of air and hotel, blah, blah, blah. But she said the thing that blew us away was how irresponsible and how completely off their heels the United States was. And that the country that usually helps to kind of lead through this is not. And it's it's just mind-boggling.
That's why we've broken into all the state pacts, the Cascadia rises, unfortunately.
Right. And that's innovation, right? Like, is that going to happen? And it gets a little scary when you think
it's also,
about things
what if we
getting
have
much worse.
a change? What if this gives us, I mean, David, I know you don't look smug there in Canada, but having a working healthcare system, I think, is an incredible thing for entrepreneurialism. I know as an individual, working person, that when the ACA kicked in, even though the Affordable Care Act is very imperfect, it actually is probably the reason I was able to extend my entrepreneurialism. Like, I got extra years even as the cost went way up, because it gave me the ability to have my family insured, even when it may have under other trends it would have been totally unaffordable. I would have had to get a job, and put on the tie and the whole bit. We were asked a question I I thought was actually great. This is our the director of Town Hall. Harking back to your analog book, David, The Revenge of Analog, from a few years ago. He asked, I think this is a terrific thing, is there are a lot of success stories that seem to rely in part on relative affluence. And I know, Jody, I know this is part of the struggle I'm sure you may be in as well too, is cupcakes will seem to some people as an extravagance, to others as self-care right now, but there's a lot, there's a whole universe. Food itself is a whole guilty, there's so many things. But will someone buy a freshly pressed LP? Will someone buy a tiny type museum like I've been selling at a time then other folks are struggling to have food?
Will someone literally click on the frickin' button below?
So I want to buy this book from a writer. There's how many hundreds or thousands of writers of books out right now asking us this question. So David, what is what you wrote about, is what we're going through now, is things even in this book. Do they require a state of relative affluence or some kind of uneven affluence to persist, or are we going to fall down into which there's less that's joyful, less that's creative, because there's no one out there who can afford to buy it?
Well, it depends. I mean, look, on a pure economic front, everything is seeing less sales, with the exception of, I don't know, jigsaw puzzles, face masks,
flour, eggs.
Fleischmann's yeast people are doing
toilet paper. Yes, no relation.
So yeah, if you are Elliott Bay Books, or what's that awesome record store across the street, Capitol Records.
Oh yeah, I don't remember the name.
I
don't own any vinyl.
Yeah, it's a great store. If you're those, you're obviously seeing a decrease in sales. Nobody is going to the store, and if this then lets up and we're in some long recession, you're obviously going to see a decrease in these sorts of things. But the analog goods were a small luxury, a tiny luxury, like a cupcake, right? And the book that I wrote, 2 books ago, was actually about food trends, and the whole first part of the book is about the cupcake business and the rise of the cupcakeries. And people are like, who's going to pay for a $5 cupcake? I don't know. It costs.
Crazy people.
A lot of people,
right?
Just kidding. I mean, but it is about the story of paying the farmers the right price, and the ripple of how much you pay for your butter. Where do you get your strawberries? Are they from the market or from Chile? Like, it's also about local economy and supporting that. Defending that. Just kidding. It's not $5.
There's always going to be people who will not spend because they want the absolute cheapest thing. That's
right.
Why Amazon exists. That's why Costco exists. That's what builds it. And then there's going to be that Starbucks phenomenon where, yes, okay, I might give up this particular thing. I'm not going to give up my my
affordable luxury.
And so most of those analog goods are affordable luxuries. I mean, you're not going to go out and buy $1,000 turntable after this, but you can still pick up for $100, and you can still get a bunch of records for $5.
Yeah, that's true.
Right.
And the records you have are still good. The books on the bookshelves are still good. A book is still something that's going to give you, joy. I mean, I spent the first couple of weeks of this crisis tweaking out and watching a lot of TV. And I think after last week, when I finished Chernobyl, great
Don't
series.
do that. I watched that. It kept me out.
David. And
I'm watching the Tangled animated series right now. Thank you.
I'm not sleeping well. I'm gonna read a book, and I started reading books. And I was like, okay, yes, this is what I need. So I've spent money in the past month. I've spent money on groceries, liquor, and books. That's it. I mean, that is all I've spent my money on. And so everybody has their own necessities. So do I think it's going to die, or is this going to affect it? I think, yeah, in the short term. But long term, when we're talking about analog goods and real things, and we were saying, well, we don't know what's going to happen after this with town hall. Well, now that everybody's tasted these talking head events, it's like, oh, it's like CNBC here. You know, are they going to be able to go back to town hall? We just paid for this renovation. People are going to be thirsting for it. People are going to be dying today. They're like, you can go to a restaurant.
Oh my God.
Restaurant's going to be packed. When they're like, town hall the first day it's open, and David Sax is back, Glenn and Jody, because David's here on his paperback tour. Like, that hall is going to be absolutely packed.
Well, and there's also I think there's the artisan, and there's
what we're missing.
It's the artisan employee thing too, is when I buy a cupcake, I'm buying it for myself or for someone else. I'm buying it for the experience. I'm buying it for the taste and the joy, but I'm also buying it, if I'm buying it from a company like Jody's, I know that I'm buying it from 100 people, right? And that's the joy of a local business, joy of entrepreneurialism, joy of knowing your producer, knowing the people, is that my little luxury then is distributed out, and I am ensuring that family farms can survive and whatever. And I'm, you know, partly you tell yourself that, and then partly it's true. It's why we shop locally, and it seems like we're going to have to shop a lot more locally. Weir, by the way, points out the record store is called Everyday Music, just so we don't miss it. We have another question from Nivedita, who's on the question line here, asking about this little more career advice, but I think it's actually, again, very appropriate right now because people are going through turmoil. What are the top things that someone who's moving from a corporate career to being an entrepreneur who wants to start a small lifestyle business, what should you pay attention to? And I know this has happened even in your household, David, directly.
Yeah, my wife worked as a corporate headhunter, not a huge corporation, a small family business, but you know, it was everyone. It was private equity and banks and stuff, and you know, like lady work pants, like a specific store she would have to go to get these like work slacks. And after 10 years and the second kid, she's like, no, just on her own. She does career coaching now. She works for herself. I think the thing that when you're going to become any sort of entrepreneur, regardless of what it is, and I'm going to let Jody, who's actually gone from corporate to this, speak to this in a second, is you got to know why you're becoming an entrepreneur. And you really got to keep that in the front of your mind when you start and all throughout it, because there's no guarantee of success, and there's no guarantee of the money you're going to make or achieving the specific dream that you have. It's a financial goal. I want to build this, and it's going to be the biggest company and whatever. And it's a crapshoot. It's a gamble. It's a hope that you have, and hopefully it'll work, but you do your best and go on. So what you really need is to know what your specific reason for doing it is. Is it to get that freedom of the lifestyle that you have? Is it to do something in your community? Is it to build something that allows you to actually express your personal values, your ethical values through the business? If you keep that in mind when you're starting and sort of set those values and that reason up around the business, then you will know success as you go through the natural whipsaw of what entrepreneurship is, the wins and losses, the daily struggles. Because unlike a corporate job, it's not this like, it's constant whipsawing. And Jody's like, hey, yeah, here, but next year I'll be there. Jody, I assume you have great advice on this because you went from.
Oh, I mean, I feel like I'm a weirdo as an entrepreneur. I didn't go out to be the richest person and make all the money and sell world peace. It was more around a clear vision around, I saw how this awesome coffee company, Starbucks, did it. I saw them walking away from what I thought was the core, which is to me espresso and coffee, not sugar-laden drinks and plush toys and you know, whatever. Great, it's all good. I'm no judgment. I felt like there was an opportunity there. So it was super clear. I feel like the craft of coffee, the craft of baking. So I was very passionate about that. And it was about creating community wealth too. So I watched, you know, studying coffee house. It's an ancient Penny University, 500-year-old cafes, soapboxes where you'd learn about politics, society over a cup of coffee. That was your tuition. I'm just enamored with that, and I'm enamored with community wealth. So I'm actually working on a complete revamp of Cupcake, and I was working on this before, and I'm still working on this, and I'm super excited. I'm bringing together some great thought leaders, and we are going to do something amazing. We're going to raise some money, and we're going to do that. I'm working on another business where I saw an opportunity in my cannabis space, and have a very clear path, and have built an amazing board. I know exactly how I'm going to raise. I know the instruments. I know who I'm going to take in terms of money. I've learned a lot of lessons, and I just encourage people to look for that where they see an opportunity, where something's broken, even if it's small. It's just, there are things all over the place, and they're abundantly clear right now, and there are opportunities to make money, collaborate with other people, ask for help, sit down with people who you admire. I did that writing my business plan for over a year, and I do that with people all the time. And to me, it's about, let's work together, and community wealth will hopefully be the winner out of some of this COVID. And I think we will start helping each other. We'll collaborate. Well, let me go buy you some food, or how can I help you, or how can my business make a difference? How can I sell your product? Can I create a mercantile at my business? Let's create our own little Pike Place market. I got all the space, and nobody can come and hang out, and we can do social distancing, and there's going to be
fish over Zoom calls.
That's right. We're playing fish from one screen to the next.
Exactly. There we go. Cupcakes, fish. No, it'd be great. But I do think that there's going to be a lot of innovation. It's been broken how it's, how we built this, and there's a lot of frustration, and hopefully people can come together. And I just encourage you to ask for help. I encourage you to talk to people you admire. People love sharing ideas, and that's how all this stuff happens. It's all conversations and ideas that start to gel and bake as you talk to others, in my opinion.
I think that's our questions, and I think we may have covered it. Weir is going to come back here in a moment. I want to thank you, Jody,
thank you guys
for being part of this. Jody is cupcakeroyale.com. David Sax is at saxdavid.com or at saxdavid on Twitter. You can find me, if you like, at Glenn F on Twitter, GLENN F like Frank. And I notice in this session is one of the fine supporters of one of my entrepreneurial projects is actually attending. Thank you, Henri Paul, for being here as well. It's nice to see. I'm already living in a global economy, and David, I know one of the joys of being able to travel is that you get to meet people. I know. Well, in the past, once again, I say retail. This is the thing. Again, the reason this book, which you can buy through a link at the bottom of the page, The Soul of an Entrepreneur, you can get it from the local bookstore, Third Place Books. Click that link and get a book, and they'll fulfill it. This is hello, and this is what's so exciting in the past. I know for you as an author, I'm imputing, is that you get to meet your readers, and it's difficult right now to meet people. So I'm always happy when people show up. Always happy to talk to you, David, and thank you to Town Hall for inviting me along.
Thank you, Glenn, and thank you to all the 52 people, I guess, which includes you and me, so 49 or so, plus some staff, who came out tonight on a Sunday night and sat in front of another screen.
Get ready for your Zoom meetings tomorrow, everybody.
Hear me talk and hear us do it. If you buy a copy of my book and email me, one day, I swear to you, I promise I will sign it. I will 100% return any message you have. I got nothing but time when I'm not taking care of my kids, which means I don't have any time. Thank you. Thank you to Weir, Candace, Josh, and the rest of the Town Hall team for having me here.
Yeah, and thank you both, and Jody, for this talk tonight. It was very entertaining. It's kind of if you have the same kind of fear that I have about what's next, it can be kind of a bleak topic, but it was very entertaining. You gave me a lot of hope, so thank you so much for being here. And again, thanks to the viewing audience for watching. If you are interested in more Town Hall virtual content, you can follow this Crowdcast channel by clicking the follow button in the top right corner. Please buy David's book using the buy the book button at the bottom. And if you are so inclined, you can also donate to Town Hall through the donate button at the bottom of the screen. So thank you all so much. Stay safe and buy local.